This is the fireproof balloons experiment. Now normally balloons aren't fireproof. I'm going to show you an interesting experiment though, where that can be different. We're going to be using fire, of course. Be sensible. I'm sure you're a sensible person already, but be sensible, especially with here, be safe, okay? The fire source we're going to use is a tea light candle, which is about as safe as it gets, I think. And I've got some matches here I need to light the candle with, of course. Selection of balloons. I've got a few other things which you can see here, a cup of water and a funnel, and we'll see what they're for in a minute. First thing I want you to do is light the candle or get someone to light it for you, okay? Let's light the candle. And remember, be sensible. Jolly good. Next thing I want you to do, and remember, have your candle in a place you're going to put your hands over it, reach round it, get a balloon and blow it up about halfway. Okay, then what I'm going to do first though is show you something that you probably don't need to do, but watch carefully anyway. So I'm going to hold the balloon over the flame and it pops. So I pop the balloon over the heat of the flame, as I'm sure you expect it to happen anyway, so not too many surprises, apart perhaps from the bang. Never mind. Of course I now need to relight the candle. Jolly good. Let's get the bits out of the way from the last explosion. So you've seen what happens, and I'm sure you could have predicted that anyway. The heat from the candle melted the rubber and the balloon popped. So let's see a slightly different version. Now I want you to do a couple of things first for this, and this is the one I want you definitely to do. That was just a demonstration to prove to you that these are ordinary balloons that pop when you heat them up over a candle flame. This is the one I want you to do. Take your balloon, blow it up fully first. Okay, and just hold it for a few seconds. Now the reason I'm doing it slightly differently on this one is because what I'm trying to do is just stretch the rubber a bit so it doesn't pull on itself so much, so it's a bit easier to blow up second time. Because next time we're going to be putting water in here, okay? So let it down again. And now this will be a bit easier to inflate a second time and get some water in, okay? Otherwise it's going to be exactly the same as the other balloon we used. You've got 2 or 3 different ways of getting water into a balloon. One is you can use a funnel like this one. You can put the balloon over the funnel and you can go to pour water in that way. That's okay, but usually you can't get too much water in that way, but you can give it a go and see how you get on with it. Another way of doing it is you put the end of the balloon over a tap, maybe in the kitchen, over the tap, fit it over nice and tightly, turn the tap gently and pour some water in, and that way by holding your finger around the tap you can usually get more water in because the water is coming out under pressure and it will push into the balloon and inflate it with water essentially. You don't need very much, maybe about that big if you do. When you take it off the tap, be careful, hold it because you're going to pressure, it's pressurized, remember. Pinch it and take it off the tap, keeping it pinched, but I want you to blow more air in. So you have to be careful, so take a deep breath and blow more air in, even though there's water in there, blow air in and blow it up. Now I'm going to show you another way of doing it, which I prefer, it's a bit easier, for me anyway, is using the water from a cup. I'm going to drink some of the water, or at least not swallow it. I'm going to put it in my mouth and then I'm going to blow it into the balloon. This can be a bit of a messy way of doing it, and of course be sensible because I don't want you to choke on the water, so be sensible how you do this, and I might spill a bit, so let's see what happens. So far, I want more though. I think I'll have a bit more than that. Notice, of course, I had to tip my head back to get the balloon in my mouth, otherwise the water will come out. When you tip your head back, of course, you don't want to swallow it, so you have to close your throat when you do that. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. And remember, you may not like the way of doing it. I've just done it here because you might be worried about actually swallowing in the water or maybe even choking. Oh no, we don't want that to happen. So then perhaps use it on the tap as I described a minute ago. But just find the way that works best for you. This is the way I like doing it. And then I want you to tie the balloon. And of course you noticed I blew more air in because I've inflated it to a similar size than one we started off with. This time I'm actually going to tie it off, okay? Now, you may need someone to help you with this, I don't know. As you can see, you can do it on your own. So, we now have our balloon inflated with some water sloshing around in the bottom. I hope you've been doing the same thing, of course. This is what I want you to do, okay? Exactly as you saw me do, in fact, with the first balloon. I want you to hold the balloon over the flame and lower it down gently and hold it above the flame and see what happens. Okay, so let's see what happens with my one. I'm going to bend down a bit because I want to see what's going on myself. Nothing happens. Amazing. So how come we can hold this balloon over the flame and nothing seems to happen? At least nothing like a big pop like we saw for the first one. Well, I think you've already got a good clue about this. It's something to do with the water inside, clearly. Now, when I hold it over, even touching the flame on the balloon doesn't seem to do much, does it? Now, if I lift this up a minute, I want to show you something. Underneath the balloon, you should see a black dot, a black splodge. Okay, now that black splodge is soot from the candle. When a candle burns, as the wax melts, it doesn't burn completely. Some of it comes up as a fine dust, and we see that as soot. And it's just soot on the bottom of that right now. But otherwise, and you can rub it off, of course, on your fingers. It's just powder. Nothing much seems to have happened. So how come? What's happening? Why isn't the rubber popping like it did before? Well, the water, of course, is the difference here. What's happening is water needs lots of heat energy to raise its temperature by about, say, 1 degree. And it needs a lot more heat to do that than, say, a block of wood or a piece of rubber. Things like rubber need lots less heat to raise their temperature by that same amount. But water needs lots more. And it's that fact that water needs so much more heat energy to raise its temperature which explains this. Because what's happening is the heat from that candle flame is going through the rubber and pretty much most of it is going straight into the water and starting to heat it up. You can imagine it a bit like the water is almost sucking the heat through the rubber. So the rubber never actually gets hot enough to pop like it did before. Now, rubber melts about 200 to 300 degrees, depends on the rubber we're using. And when we popped the balloon earlier on with no water in it, we held it above the flame. That flame was heating to maybe up to even 1,000 degrees Celsius, somewhere between 700 and 1,000. It does depend where you hold the balloon actually, because the temperature changes the further you get from the candle. But that popped because we melted the rubber. We melted a tiny hole in the rubber. It rapidly opened and the balloon popped. In this balloon, the water is sucking the heat through the rubber, so the rubber really doesn't get hot enough anymore. In fact, if I hold it there just for a few seconds, heating up the rubber and the water. Let's see what happens here. Feels pretty cold to me. Interesting, isn't it? So almost immediately the heat gets transferred through the rubber into the water to raise the temperature of the water. Try again. Of course, I'm getting a bit of soot on my hand now. Let's bring it down a bit. Very hot there right now, I can tell you. But I can't even feel it. It's not even warm. So the heat must be going pretty much straight through. Therefore, the balloon rubber doesn't get hot enough for a hole to appear and pop. And that's why you can heat the water up in a balloon like this. In fact, we could carry on heating this and we could raise the temperature of the water to boiling point if we had time, because even then the rubber won't be hot enough, because boiling temperature of water, of course, is 100 degrees Celsius in this room right now, and that's still nowhere near hot enough to melt the rubber. But I don't recommend doing that. I recommend just doing what I've just shown you. and just heat the water, just to prove to yourself that water needs lots more heat energy to raise its temperature than, say, rubber or a balloon. So let's think of a few things we could change. Well, in front of me, you've got a few clues straight away. What about different colour balloons? That'd be interesting. I'll give you a few clues about that straight away. Different colours reflect or absorb heat differently. So there's something to think about. I'm using a yellow balloon for this experiment, mostly because I wanted you to be able to see the water sloshing around inside a bit more easily. It's slightly easier to see that in a brightly coloured balloon compared to, say, some of the darker colours like that one. But try it with a darker balloon or a lighter balloon, different colours. That's the way to go with this one. What about different shaped balloons? Over here I've got some sausage shaped balloons. How about them? Will they work? Okay. In case you think there is something a bit different about this balloon, I wonder what would happen if we could somehow lift the candle flame or another flame and heat it at the side, away from the water. I'll leave you to figure out how that might be possible to do, but be careful, of course, when you start handling flames. So you be sensible whatever way you choose to do that. So in other words, don't heat it where the water is, heat it somewhere else, if you can figure a way of doing that. What about that? What about using different size balloons? This one was about halfway up, wasn't it? What about if I only just had it a small balloon, maybe just a small balloon full of water, a bit like one of these water bombs that people have. Could try that, I guess. That'd be an interesting variable as well. Water bombs, why not? But something smaller. What about if we blew it up much bigger? So it's, you know, almost as big as it can go before it'll pop, and put some water in and try that. What about if you start off with, say, slightly warmer water before you even do anything? I wonder what that would do. Obviously you can't make it so hot. If you're going to use this way of putting it in, or even holding it with your fingers, it's got to be hot enough for you to bear it, either in your mouth or by your fingers. But how about hot water? What about freezing cold water? Again, if you're going to put it in your mouth, make sure it doesn't make your teeth ache or anything. So very cold water, see if that makes a difference. And I'm sure you can think of a few other things to try.
Oh no!